Hello and welcome to Book Nook. My name is Bethany Kinder and I'm the Communications and Development Director for Read Aloud West Virginia. Joining me today on Book Nook is a very special guest. Her name is Christa Hamra and she's a sales executive at Komax Business Systems. Welcome to Book Nook, Christa.
Thank you, Bethany. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. So I want to talk to Christa today about reading per usual, but I also want to dive into a little bit more about what you do professionally. So let's start off with that. Tell me what you do.
Okay. I am a sales executive with Komax Business Systems located in South Charleston, and we are a office equipment, document solutions, and IT services company. So basically what I tell my clients is anything except papers, Post-its, and pens we can help you with for your business. I am a salesperson and I have a very large sales territory. And basically we just provide office solutions for businesses, also in an effort to help them be more efficient and cost-effective, giving them solutions and strategies and workflows to better their business.
Have you always been a sales executive?
I have always been in sales. I hate to say for how long, but we'll just say it, 25 years. I started when I was 10. And so yes, I've always been in sales, have a marketing degree from Marshall, and just have always loved that aspect of talking to people, getting to know people, interacting with different people. The majority of my career actually has been in media marketing and advertising sales and sales management. So I've always had to kind of put on a different hat. There's lots of different personalities you meet with and get to know. And I'm pleased to say that a lot of my clients have become very good friends to this day.
So you enjoy what you do?
I love what I do. Yes, I can't imagine not being in some form of sales or sales management.
Has reading been a part of your passion for sales or even your success at all?
Absolutely. I think that reading is a foundation for pretty much everything in life. As they say, knowledge is power, and the way you get knowledge is by reading. And if you can even try to imagine, I mean, I know literacy is an issue in our country. If you could even try to imagine what a day without reading would be like, if you can even, it comes so natural to most people that even thinking about that is just beyond something that they could comprehend. But without reading, how do you learn? How do you grow? How do you interact? How do you drive? How do you do any of these things? So yes, I think reading is the basis for all things to come. That's why we learn it when we're so little.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that echoes what we believe at Read Aloud West Virginia, which is that we should start at birth and start reading to our kids throughout the grades. So speaking of childhood, was reading present in your childhood?
Absolutely, for several reasons. One, my sister was a teacher when I was growing up. She was actually my fourth grade teacher, so that's a little bit unusual. But because of that, reading was always a part of my life. I mean, I was taught from her, from other teachers, from my parents, that was very important. And to this day, I am a stickler for good grammar. Like, that is my one pet peeve, is I cannot handle bad grammar, unless it's a typo. And also, for me personally, I have a very short attention span. So as a child, reading was something that kept me focused. And I was calm, I was engaged, I was in the story. And, everybody loves movies, everybody loves those things, but they always say the book is better than the movie. Yes. Because you get to use your own imagination to create what they're describing, instead of letting a movie do it for you. And that's the better scenario, because you get to the whole world. I mean, you can imagine whatever it is you want to imagine it when you're reading something.
Absolutely. Well, what a great testament to what Read Aloud believes, but what also you interject into the community, I imagine, on a daily basis. Absolutely. When you interact with your clients and others.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. So tell us about the first book that you're going to share with us today.
Okay. The first book I'm going to read is called Somebody Loves You, Mr. Hatch. And the reason this book kind of spoke to me is because it is a good lesson that you're never really alone, even when in those times when you feel like nobody's noticing you, or you don't have any friends or whatever. You're never really alone, and there's always somebody there for you. And people perceive you maybe differently than than you perceive yourself, and I think that's a great lesson for anyone at any age.
Absolutely. So you would say this book is geared towards elementary students?
Absolutely, yes.
Wonderful. We are looking forward to hearing this book, and I want to thank Christa for joining us today on Book Nook. Stay tuned so that she will read to you all as viewers.
Our first book today is Somebody Loves You, Mr. Hatch, written by Eileen Spinelli, illustrations by Paul Yalowitz. Mr. Hatch was tall and thin, and he did not smile. Every morning at 6:30 sharp, he would leave his brick house and walk 8 blocks to the shoelace factory where he worked. At lunchtime, he would sit alone in a corner, eat his cheese and mustard sandwich, and drink a cup of coffee. Sometimes he brought a prune for dessert. After work, he would make 2 stops, at the newsstand to get a paper, and at the grocery store to buy a fresh turkey wing for his supper. After supper, he read the paper, took a shower, and went to bed early. He keeps to himself. That is what everyone says about Mr. Hatch. On Saturday, when Mr. Hatch stepped onto the porch with his dustpan and broom, he got a surprise. A package wrapped in brown paper. He had never spoken to the postman before. "Thank you, Mr. Goober," he said. Mr. Goober smiled. "You're welcome. I always enjoy delivering packages." Mr. Hatch tore the brown paper off. Inside was a white box, which he opened to find another box. This one was heart-shaped, all satiny red with a pink bow on top. It was filled with candy. Something fluttered to the porch floor. It was a little white card. He picked it up. It said, "Somebody loves you." Only then did he remember that it was Valentine's Day. Mr. Hatch wondered and wondered. Now who would send this to me? He was all alone. He had no friends. And yet someone had sent him a valentine. Who? Who? He put the box on the coffee table and tried to do some dusting. But every time he left the room, he had to keep peeking to see if the box was still there. He dusted and dusted, and the dust cloth seemed to whisper, "Somebody loves you. Somebody loves you." At last he flung the dust cloth away and exclaimed, "Why, I've got a secret admirer." And then he did something he had never done before. He laughed. He laughed and danced and clapped his hands. And then he took a piece of candy from the box and ate it. Mr. Hatch changed his shirt and found some old aftershave in the bottom drawer. He splashed it on his face. He picked out a yellow tie with pink polka dots and put it on. And then he went for a walk. Maybe, he thought, I will meet the person who sent me the candy. Of course, no one had ever seen Mr. Hatch wearing a tie, or smelling of aftershave, or smiling. So he got a lot of attention. Mrs. Weed tripped over her dog. Mr. Dunwoody nearly fell off his ladder. And little Tina Finn spilled all the toys out of her wagon. Mr. Hatch waved hello to them all. On Monday it was back to work. At lunchtime, Mr. Hatch sat in the middle of the cafeteria. He spoke to everyone and passed out chocolates from his heart box. On the way home, as usual, he stopped at the newsstand. Mr. Smith handed him the usual newspaper. "I think I'll have a pack of mints," said Mr. Hatch, not as usual. Mr. Smith was shocked. "Was that you speaking, Mr. Hatch?" "Indeed it was," said Mr. Hatch. "I said I would also like a pack of mints. And if you don't mind me saying so, Mr. Smith, you don't look very well today." Mr. Smith recovered from his shock to reply, "You're right, I don't feel very well. I have a cold. I was supposed to go to the doctor's this afternoon, but the stand has been so busy I haven't had the time." Mr. Hatch smiled. "Why, I'd be happy to watch the stand for you while you go." Mr. Smith could hardly believe his ears. "You would?" "Certainly, just show me what to do." And so Mr. Hatch ran this newsstand for an hour. He wondered if any of the women who stopped by to buy a paper or a magazine or a candy bar had sent him his mysterious Valentine. When Mr. Smith returned, Mr. Hatch made his usual stop at the grocery store. "I'm a little tired of turkey wings," he told Mr. Todd. "I think I'll have a nice fresh slice of ham." Mr. Todd weighed the meat and wrapped it. "You look worried," said Mr. Hatch. "I am," said Mr. Todd. "My little girl is late. She hasn't come home from school yet, and I can't leave the store to look for her until my wife arrives." "Goodness, why didn't you say so?" said Mr. Hatch. "I will go look for her." And so he walked to school and found little Melanie Todd by the swings and brought her home. Thank you," said the grocer. "Any time," said Mr. Hatch. After supper, Mr. Hatch did not bother to read the paper. He decided to bake brownies instead. It would be nice to have brownies to share the next day with the people at the shoelace factory. As he baked, the warm chocolate smell of brownies floated through the neighborhood. Children gathered round Mr. Hatch's house, sniffing the air. "Well, I suppose the factory can wait," said Mr. Hatch, as he looked out the window, and he brought out 2 platefuls. "Now what are brownies without lemonade?" he said, and he stirred up a nice cold pitcher. When the parents came to gather their children, they had some brownies too. It turned out to be a picnic in Mr. Hatch's backyard. He dusted off an old harmonica and played songs he remembered from his boyhood. Everyone danced. And so the days and weeks went by. When Mr. Hatch wasn't smiling, he was laughing. And when he wasn't laughing, he was helping someone. And when he wasn't helping someone, he was having a party in his yard or on his porch. He seemed to have forgotten about finding the person who sent him the Valentine. Then one afternoon, Mr. Goober, the postman, came to his door. His face was very serious. "Come in, Mr. Goober," said Mr. Hatch. "You look upset." "I am upset," he said. "I made a mistake some time ago. My supervisor is very angry with me. Do you... Yes, Mr. Goober? What is it?" "Do you recall the package I delivered to you on Valentine's Day, I think it was?" "Yes, I believe so," replied Mr. Hatch, beginning to feel a little uneasy. "I don't suppose you still have it," said Mr. Goober sadly. "As a matter of fact," said Mr. Hatch, "I still have the box. The candy is gone, though. Why do you ask?" The postman took a deep breath. "I'm afraid I delivered it to the wrong address. I was supposed to be to another house." Mr. Hatch recalled tearing off the brown paper. It had never occurred to him to look at the address. He fetched the heart-shaped box and the pink bow and gave them to the postman. "I do hope your supervisor won't be too angry with you now." The postman was heading down the sidewalk when Mr. Hatch called from his porch. "Mr. Goober, I forgot something." He gave the postman the little white card. Alone in his living room, Mr. Hatch sighed. Nobody loved me after all. Then he read the paper and took a shower and went to bed early. The next morning at 6:30 sharp, Mr. Hatch left his brick house and walked 8 blocks to the shoelace factory. At lunchtime he sat in the corner by himself, ate his cheese and mustard sandwich, and drank a cup of coffee. After work he stopped at the newsstand for his paper, but he did not speak to Mr. Smith. And when he ordered his turkey wing from Mr. Todd, he did not smile. Nor did he pat little Melanie Todd on the head, or break brownies, or have picnics or parties, or play his old harmonica anymore. On Saturday morning, Mr. Hatch woke to a bright and sunny day. He put on his old overalls and went out to the porch with his dustpan and broom. He couldn't believe his eyes. All over the porch were red and white hearts and pink bows. There were boxes of candy on the chairs and yellow streamers flowing from the ceiling, and sticking out of his mailbox was a shiny silver harmonica. The front yard was filled with people, happy, smiling people. They were holding up a huge sign with hand-painted letters. It said, "Everybody loves Mr. Hatch." Mr. Hatch dabbed a tear with his handkerchief. "I do believe," he sniffed, "somebody loves me after all." And then he smiled, and then he laughed, and then he hurried down to be with his friends. The next book is Miss Nelson is Missing by Harry Allard and James Marshall. The kids in room 207 were misbehaving again. Spitballs stuck to the ceiling, paper planes whizzing through the air. They were the worst behaved class in the whole school. "Now settle down," said Miss Nelson in a sweet voice. But the class would not settle down. They whispered and giggled. They squirmed and made faces. They were even rude during story hour, and they always refused to do their lessons. "Something will have to be done," said Miss Nelson. The next morning, Miss Nelson did not come to school. "Wow," yelled the kids, "now we can really act up." They began to make more spitballs and paper planes. "Today, let's just be terrible," they said. "Not so fast," hissed an unpleasant voice. A woman in an ugly black dress stood before them. "I am your new teacher, Miss Viola Swamp," and she rapped the desk with her ruler. "Where is Miss Nelson?" asked the kids. "Never mind that," snapped Miss Swamp. "Open those arithmetic books." Miss Nelson's kids did as they were told. They could see that Miss Swamp was a real witch. She meant business. Right away she put them to work, and she loaded them down with homework. "We'll have no story hour today," said Miss Swamp. "Keep your mouth shut," said Miss Swamp. "Sit perfectly still," said Miss Swamp. "And if you misbehave, you'll be sorry," said Miss Swamp. The kids in room 207 had never worked so hard. Days went by, and there was no sign of Miss Nelson. The kids missed Miss Nelson. "Maybe we should try to find her," they said. Some of them went to the police. Detective McSmog was assigned to the case. He listened to their story. He scratched his chin. He said. I think Miss Nelson is missing." Detective Smog would not be much help. Other kids went to Miss Nelson's house. The shades were tightly drawn and no one answered the door. In fact, the only person they did see was the wicked Miss Viola Swamp coming up the street. "If she sees us, she'll give us more homework." They got away just in time. "Maybe something terrible happened to Miss Nelson. Maybe she was gobbled up by a shark," said one of the kids. But that didn't seem likely. "Maybe Miss Nelson went to Mars," said another kid. But that didn't seem likely either. "I know," exclaimed one know-it-all. "Maybe Miss Nelson's car was carried off by a swarm of angry butterflies." But that was the least likely of all. The kids in room 207 became very discouraged. It seemed that Miss Nelson was never coming back, and they would be stuck with Miss Viola Swamp forever. They heard footsteps in the hall. "Here comes the witch," they whispered. "Hello, children," someone said in a sweet voice. It was Miss Nelson. "Did you miss me?" she asked. "We certainly did," cried all the kids. "Where were you?" "That's my little secret," said Miss Nelson. "How about a story hour?" "Oh, yes," cried the kids. Miss Nelson noticed that during story hour no one was rude or silly. "What brought about this lovely change?" she asked. "That's our little secret," said the kids. Back home, Miss Nelson took off her coat, and hung it in the closet, right next to an ugly black dress. When it was time for bed, she sang a little song. "I'll never tell," she said to herself with a smile. P.S. Detective McSmog is working a new case. He is now looking for Miss Viola Swamp. Our next book today is called Mama, Why? It's by Karma Wilson, best-selling author of Bear Snores On, and the illustrations are by Simon Mendez. When the moon sails high in the Arctic sky, Polar Cub asks, "Mama, why?" Mama says, "Moon floats up there to say goodnight to polar bears." He glides above the shine's sweet dreams and sends them down on silver beams. And while you doze in soft moonlight, you dream sweet dreams from the moon so bright. Dreams for you from moon in the sky. And Polar Cub asks, "Mama, why?" Moon is friends with the stars that glow, and the stars tell Moon the tales they know. They tell him of princes, pirates, and queens, of palaces, kingdoms, and magical scenes. Such wondrous stories the moon must share. He turns them to dreams for polar bears. Stories for you from the stars so high. And Polar Cub asks, "Mama, why?" "Well," says Mama, "during the day the stars leave the sky and wander away. They travel to lands both near and far. The places they go, those curious stars. And while they travel, they see such sights. They share them with Moon as they twinkle at night. But come every day, the stars say goodbye." And Polar Cub asks, "Mama, why?" "Well, stars don't sleep like you or me. Instead, they travel the galaxy. They sometimes sprinkle dust as they go, and stardust, my dear, is what we call snow. So now, little one, let's rest our heads and dream moonbeams in a stardust bed. I'll dream of my dearest the whole night through." And Polar Cub asks, "Mama, who?" Mama whispers softly, "You." Our next book is Room on a Broom by Julia Donaldson and Axel Scheffler. The witch had a cat, and a hat that was black, and long ginger hair and a braid down her back. How the cat purred and how the witch grinned, as they sat on their broomstick and flew through the wind. But how the witch wailed and how the cat spat, when the wind blew so wildly it blew off the hat. "Down," cried the witch, and they flew to the ground. They searched for the hat, but no hat could be found. Then out of the bushes on thundering paws, here bounded a dog with the hat in his jaws. He dropped it politely, then eagerly said, as the witch pulled the hat firmly down on his head, "I am a dog as keen as can be. Is there room on the broom for a dog like me?" "Yes," cried the witch, and the dog clambered on. The witch tapped the broomstick, and whoosh, they were gone. Over the fields and the forest they flew. The dog wagged his tail, and the stormy wind blew. The witch laughed out loud and held on to her hat, but away blew the bow from her braid, just like that. "Down," cried the witch as they flew to the ground. They searched for the bow, but no bow could be found. Then out from a tree with an ear-splitting shriek, there flapped a green bird with the bow in her beak. She dropped it politely and bent her head low, then said, as the witch tied her braid in the bow, "I am a bird as green as can be. Is there room on the broom for a bird like me? Yes, cried the witch, so the bird fluttered on. The witch tapped the broomstick, and whoosh, they were gone. Is it time? Over the reeds and the rivers they flew. The birds shrieked with glee, and the stormy wind blew. They shot through the sky to the back of beyond. The witch clutched her bow, but let go of her wand. Down, cried the witch, as they flew to the ground. They searched for the wand, but no wand could be found. Then all of a sudden from out of a pond leaped a dripping wet frog with a dripping wet wand. He dropped it politely, then said with a croak, as the witch dried the wand on a fold of her cloak, I am a frog as clean as can be. Is there room on the broom for a frog like me? Yes, said the witch, so the frog bounded on. The witch tapped the broomstick, and whoosh, they were gone. Over the moors and the mountains they flew. The frog jumped for joy, and the broom snapped in two. Down fell the cat and the dog and the frog. Down they went tumbling into a bog. The witch's half broomstick flew into a cloud, and the witch heard a roar that was scary and loud. I'm a dragon as mean as can be, and you, witch, look like a good supper to me. No, cried the witch, flying higher and higher. The dragon flew after her, breathing out fire. Help, cried the witch, flying down to the ground. She looked all around, but no help could be found. The dragon drew nearer and started to drool. He said, I won't let you go. Do you think I'm a fool? But just as he planned to begin on his feast, from out of the ditch rose a horrible beast. It was tall, dark, and sticky, and feathered and furred. It had 4 frightful heads. It had wings like a bird. And its terrible voice, when it started to speak, was a yowl and a growl and a croak and a shriek. It dripped and it squelched as it strode from the ditch, and it said to the dragon, Buzz off, that's my witch. The dragon drew back and he started to shake. I'm sorry, he sputtered, I made a mistake. It's nice to have met you, but now I must fly. And he spread out his wings and was off through the sky. Then down flew the bird and down jumped the frog. Down climbed the cat and shoo, said the dog. And thank you, oh thank you, the grateful witch cried. Without you I'd be in that dragon's inside. Then she filled up the cauldron and said with a grin, Find something, everyone, throw something in. So the frog found a lily, the cat found a cone, the bird found a twig, and the dog found a bone. And they threw them all, and the witch stirred them well. And while she was stirring, she muttered a spell. Iggity, ziggity, zaggity, zoom. Then out rose a truly magnificent broom, with seats for the witch and the cat and the dog, a nest for the bird and a pool for the frog. Yes, cried the witch, and they all clambered on. The witch tapped the broomstick, and whoosh, they were gone. That's about all the time we have left for this episode of Book Nook. We thank you for joining, and we appreciate your support. You can find all of these books and more at your local library. Thanks for tuning in.